From the Nebraska State Fair, the Omaha World Herald and KMTV 3 News Now bring you a debate between Governor Pete Ricketts and 10th District State Representative Bob Krist.
Welcome to today's debate for Nebraska Governor. I'm Michael Severe from the Omaha World Herald.
And I'm Craig DeGrelli with KMTV 3 News Now. We will be your moderators for this hour-long debate. We intend to have a robust exchange of ideas.
Let's meet the two candidates first. Governor Pete Ricketts is the Republican and incumbent, and State Senator Bob Krist is a Democrat and challenger.
A couple of rules before we get started. We will give equal time to each candidate. We're asking you to keep your answers to about 60 seconds. You'll see the red button or the red light go on either side. That will tell you that your time is up. When we ask you to move on, please do so. In addition, we reserve the right to follow up, meaning we want to give the candidates a chance to respond directly if attacked by your opponent, and we will do that. So, without further ado, let's get started. Michael?
We're going to start with the property tax question. It goes to Senator Krist first. Would you support a plan that directed more state income and sales tax towards reducing the property taxes that Nebraskans pay? Please explain.
Absolutely. Not so long ago, we gave 20% of our income tax to fund education. This past budget cycle, it was less than 3%. That burden, not funding education, causes a further burden on the taxpayers, the property taxpayers. We need to find a way to balance that three-legged stool of taxes and reduce the burden on property tax every way that we can. I honestly believe that by going back to a point in time that I remember in 2009, 10, 11 timeframe, the balance of taxes that were paid, particularly to education, held down the burden on the property taxpayer.
Okay, Governor Ricketts, tax question for you as well. You have repeatedly said that property tax reform is a top priority, yet it has not happened. Why should the voters trust that you would get it done in the next 4 years?
Well, thank you, Craig. And first of all, I'd like to thank all my family and supporters are here. My lovely wife, Suzanne, our First Lady, Lieutenant Governor's here. I see Governor Orr's here as well as some state senators. Thank you all very much for being here today. And property tax is absolutely the #1 issue that people have talked to me about as I've been running for governor 5 years ago and up until today. And Craig, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, though, because I think we have. We've increased the property tax credit relief fund in my first year by over 40%. In my second year, we came back with a bill, LB 958 and 959. 958 added another $20 million directed toward farmers and ranchers. In fact, Senator Krist was the only person to vote against that bill. In last year, we came back with a bill that would have revalued how we do ag land. And this year, we came back with a bill that was a 20% tax cut on property taxes that was stalled again in the legislature. The last 2 years, both have been stalled by filibusters in the legislature. So I have been working on property taxes every year, have introduced legislation with the legislature every year to get that done. And that's also in contrast to my opponent, who has been in the legislature for 10 years, and the only bill he ever introduced on property tax relief would have raised your property taxes about $263 for an average Nebraska household.
Senator Krist, you've been critical of the governor for not reforming property taxes. He says you've been in the legislature for almost 10 years. What do you think you could do to address property taxes from the governor's mansion that you haven't been able to do from the legislature?
Well, first of all, there are 49 senators and 1 governor, and this governor has proposed a bill, at least last year, that would have given TD Ameritrade and the corporate tax and the highest income earners the largest portion of their taxes back, while it would have put $25 in your pocket. It would have been $13 million for TD Ameritrade. I analyze every bill that comes forward, and I make sure in making my decision about whether to support that bill, it makes sense. The past 4 years, the governor has introduced legislation that takes more and more money out of our rainy day fund. That doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense at all.
Governor, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, the bill that we had this year was a 20% tax cut on your property taxes. It was 10-to-1 property tax relief to income tax relief and workforce development. And as my opponent knows, TD Ameritrade is a great company, but my family owns less than 10% of that now. My dad and I haven't been involved in the operations of that in, years. What we actually had on the table was something that would have delivered significant property tax relief, would have more than doubled the amount of tax relief coming from the state to over $4.5 billion over 10 years. It would have been significant, and it was something that got stalled in the legislature.
All right, let's move on to...
It was stalled in the legislature, I think, because there wasn't enough consensus building There was only a bullying to make sure that the bill came forward. We need to make sure that we build consensus and that it comes out of the legislative process.
Okay, let's move on to Medicaid. And Senator Krist, this question is for you. A proposal to expand Medicaid to about 90,000 low-income Nebraskans is going to be on the November ballot. You've said you support the measure, which would increase the Medicaid cost by about $64 million a year when fully implemented. Where would you find that money?
Well, first of all, I've been involved with Medicaid expansion and this dialogue for the whole 10 years I've been in the legislature. The prime point here is that over 30 states have already implemented some form of Medicaid expansion. Using a judicious use of our waiver process, we can find the kind of support that we need for 90,000 people who are uninsured. 35,000 of those are my fellow veterans. It is not going to cost the state that much money, and it needs to be done. I supported the petition, and I will vote for it, and I will help enable it as governor.
All right, Governor Ricketts, a similar question. You've said you do not support the measure when it comes to Medicaid expansion. How would you propose to provide health care coverage to those 90,000 people, most of whom currently work?
Well, the real problem here with regard to health care coverage is that Obamacare was a failure. You know, President Obama told us we'd be able to keep our doctors, that our premiums wouldn't go up, and none of that actually turned out to be true. Our premiums have gone up. Our deductibles have gone up. And as I travel around the state and talk to people, this is a huge issue, especially for small businesses who are trying to provide those benefits to their folks. The solution has to be that the federal government needs to take this on and in the Congress and working with the president, get real health care reform, something that would make it affordable so people could actually buy it. One of my concerns with Medicaid expansion, and Craig, I actually disagree with you a little bit, I think that by the time it gets fully phased in, it's about $100 million to the state. And what that means is that's going to be the program itself will be moved away from the elderly and disabled and children that it's actually supposed to be focused on. And the states that have done it have gone vastly over their budgets. And that means that here in our state, it's going to take away money from education, higher education, property tax relief, and roads.
The governor's made an absolute statement about states that have funded it, and it's not true. So many states have not gone over their budget. Google it, fact check it. It is true.
Well, we'll stay here with you, Governor Ricketts. We're talking about the death penalty now. The state has argued in court to keep the source of Nebraska's death penalty drug a secret. Why shouldn't your constituents know where Nebraska gets its execution drugs?
Well, when it comes to the death penalty, this is an important tool that we use at the state to be able to protect the public safety. And in particular, I think about our corrections officers who we ask to go into our prisons where we know there's dangerous people because we put them there. It also helps protect our law enforcement officers. And so it's really incumbent upon us as the state to be able to carry out the sentences as ordered by the court and the will of the Nebraska people. Remember, Nebraskans voted 61-39 to restore the death penalty when the legislature, including Senator Krist, abolished it. And so what we do as part of our state government is we keep the execution team secret. That's to protect their identities. And that's part of what we're doing with regard to all the people that are involved with regard to this process. It's really to protect their identities, and that's why we put the process in place we did.
All right, Senator Krist, the governor just noted this. You do not support the death penalty, but more than 60% of Nebraskans disagree with you. Would your administration carry out executions despite your personal objections?
I took an oath of office to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When I take the oath of office and become governor, I will again take an oath to carry out the laws of the land. I will do that. However, I will say this. I am pro-life. I am pro-life from conception to natural death. And I believe that we need to look at the death penalty issue again. Those 60% were the 60% who voted in that particular election, which, by the way, I will own that vote. I voted to abolish the death penalty, and I voted to override the governor's veto on the death penalty. Check my record, measure and weigh it. That's where it is. The death penalty issue has been an incredibly emotional issue for many people in this state, and I too have traveled around the state. I can tell you that we're not a state. If we are really a state of pro-life, then we need to analyze all phases of pro-life.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to go back to Governor Ricketts now about corrections. Nebraska's prisons remain at 160% capacity. Staff turnover remains high. The state's experienced 2 prison riots over the last 4 years. What would you do to fix the agency?
Well, we need to make sure that our corrections are functioning to protect the public safety. And that's what we've been doing over the course of the last few years. We really all know that corrections have been underinvested, so we've asked for investments from the legislature of about $117 million in capital expenditures, plus additional operating expenses to help raise some of our correctional officers' pay and help really stabilize that attrition we've been seeing. And we've seen the results. So, for example, we've managed to improve the risk-reducing programming that we have in our correction system by about 25%, which has helped us reduce our staff assaults by 40%. We ended porn going to our inmates. We've fixed the sentence correction calculation. We've managed to really work on how we get people that programming before they reach their parole eligibility date. One of our great programs, the 5 Ventures, has had 175 graduates. 25 of those have left our system. 94% of them have jobs. Not one of them has come back into the system. So we've made a tremendous amount of progress, but we've got more work to do, and that's what we're going to continue to do, is focus on how we can protect the public safety.
Senator Krist, question to you. If you were elected governor, how would you fix the agency?
I would go back to where we were. I was involved with corrections investigations, special investigations, long before the governor came into office. In fact, one of the first things he did was to abolish and do away with our stakeholders group that we had put together 5 years before that. We had measures in place that would have corrected both the intake, the sentencing parameters, as well as the correction system. I would again go back to reform those stakeholders and make the corrections that we had initially talked about doing. I also can tell you that there's been more riotous activities, more incidents, more deaths, and more murders in the last 4 years than there have been in the last 30 years in corrections under his administration and under the leadership of Mr. Frakes, who will be packing his bags to Washington if I become governor.
Governor Ricketts, Scott Frakes, and the job he's doing.
Well, I'd like to respond back to the senator. So what the senator is talking about there is LB 605, which was a justice reinvestment effort. And that, I didn't terminate that, it expired. And it had served its purpose. We actually made changes with regard to our justice system and actually helped us flatten out, even take down a little bit our inmates with regard to how many we have in our system. And so it served its purpose. And as I mentioned, we are working on things. We've done things like end the terrible practice of co-ed incarceration. We're working at expanding capacity. We're working at expanding programming. And we've been successful in those areas. Now, certainly, it was underinvested for a long time, and we've got a lot of work yet to do, but we're on the right track.
I need to correct the governor. LB 605 was a statute change. It was not a program that expired. What expired is what he terminated, and that was the installation of a stakeholders group made up of all 3 branches of government that met almost on a monthly basis to start, actually weekly basis to start out with, and then monthly after that. That group of stakeholders was disbanded because the governor wanted to do it my way or the highway. It's not working. Corrections is a debacle, and what we have right now is a 1/3 turnover of every corrections officer, 30% attrition. Try to run your business with a 30% attrition.
Actually, the senator's wrong. What happened was, again, we had this group that was working on the justice reinvestment, and the mandate for that group came to an end. The outside consultant that was helping us, they weren't being paid anymore, so they were going home, and that's why that meeting ended.
All right, it's time for our first commercial break. When we come back, the candidates will ask each other a question. You are watching the debate for governor in Nebraska on KMTV 3 News Now and the Omaha World Herald. Welcome back to the debate for governor, and it's time for the candidates to ask each other a question. By a drawing of cards, Senator Krist, you go first.
Sure, thank you. Governor, you've boasted many times about running the state like a business, and I think that you would agree that there are certain things in business that may not want to be likened to the running of the government. Paul Singer, who's been called the doomsday investor, orchestrated the sale of our own jewel in Sydney, Cabela's. It cost us 2,000 jobs and many, many families who are hurting because of it. That man gave you a large amount of money for your campaign and also gave your father's PAC, your PAC, a large amount of money. Why did you stand by and let us lose that jewel in Cabela's and 2,000 jobs?
Well, what the senator is talking about is that Bass Pro, a company based in Springfield, Missouri, basically negotiated with Cabela's to be able to buy them. That was something that was done between Bass Pro and Cabela's. They negotiated that. And I didn't have anything to do with that because that's a private sector transaction. And part of what we do in government is really create the environment for people to be successful. But it's really up to those private companies to manage themselves and decide what they're going to do best for the people that are associated with their companies. What we have done is work to make sure that we've put, for example, the Department of Labor has opened up an office in Sydney. We've recruited companies back to Sydney. In fact, when I was in Canada last year, we recruited Agriplastics to open up their first U.S. expansion in Sydney so they can employ people there. And we are working to really help Sydney find jobs for those folks who are being displaced by this transaction. And not everybody is leaving. We still are keeping some of the functions of Cabela's there. They're still keeping the Cabela's names. But we are working to make sure that everybody that's displaced there finds another job so they can continue to remain in Sydney or in the region.
So you're telling the people of Nebraska you had no knowledge as the takeover and the forced sale of Cabela's that cost the state 2,000 jobs?
Yeah, that's correct, Senator. I'm not involved in any of that. I'm not on the board of Cabela's. I'm not on the board of Bass Pro. I'm not involved in any of that.
Well, maybe the press can look into it.
All right, Governor Ricketts, your chance to ask Senator Krist a question.
Property taxes, we've already discussed, is the #1 issue here in the state. It's something that I've introduced legislation on every year that I've been governor, working with the legislature to do that. Putting our farmers and ranchers at a competitive disadvantage because ag land valuations are going up 252%. Senator, you've been in the legislature 10 years. You put in a procedural motion to kill the bill we had last year. You were the only vote against the $20 million going to our farmers and ranchers a couple of years ago. And the one bill you introduced into the legislature, LB 468, would have actually gutted the property tax credit relief fund. And for your average Nebraska home of about $150,000, that would have driven that property tax up by $263. Given that you've been there 10 years and haven't done anything on property taxes, why should the people of Nebraska believe you now that you're running for governor, you're actually going to work on this at all?
Well, the fact that you're asking the people of Nebraska to give you 4 more years means that you haven't done anything in the last 4 years either. But I will explain my bill. My bill was very clear. It was trying to get everyone's attention to the fact that you're pulling money out of the rainy day fund and giving money back. We are depleting our rainy day fund. It has less than $290 million in there. When I was there in 2009, we had about $800 million going into that recession depression, and we barely made it out the end. We're at a point right now, if we see that same thing again, in the escalation of you taking money out of the rainy day fund and giving money back, we're going to be in big trouble. I introduced that bill to make sure that people understood the ramification of continuing to rob the savings account to try to do things that should not have been done.
Rainy day fund.
So we all know that over the last couple of years, we've seen a hard time in our ag sector. Farm incomes have been cut about half since 2012, 2013. And that's the biggest part of our economy. And so that means we've seen that impact at the state with our revenues going down. In fact, the previous 2 years, we actually saw, well, actually not this year, but the year before, we saw our revenues go down. And that means we all had to tighten our belts. And part of the way we made our budget work was by borrowing from the rainy day fund. In fact, we actually put more money back in this year because our revenues actually exceeded forecasts. But what that represents is that commitment to the property tax credit relief fund and delivering the property tax over $840 million in my budgets. That's direct dollar for dollar property tax relief from the state to all property owners in the state. And that was a priority in my budget.
You respond?
Sure. Actually, the money that went back into the rainy day fund had nothing to do with the governor's budget or the legislative budget. It is an automatic trigger. When we make so much money, it goes back into the rainy day. And that was put in place many, many years ago by Governor Johans and then modified by Governor Heinemann. And having been there 10 years, I understand that we have to continue to do that. I will tell you, in 2009, when we were faced with a $1 billion budget cut, the only money we had left in our rainy day fund was the money that came from the federal government, about $250 million. We cannot sustain another hard time with this kind of a rainy day.
We have to move on. We have a reader question. It's from 29-year-old Brandon Besh. He wants to know who is the biggest funder of your campaign. Senator Krist, your two biggest donors are Philip Perry, a Lincoln businessman, and the State Teachers Union. Why should we not think that the funder's support would not unduly influence your policy choices?
Right. Well, when you talk about large funders coming into my campaign, obviously when we do grassroots, you could have given me $5,000 or $10,000 and it could be huge. So that kind of money is not going to influence me to turn one cheek or the other. Secondly, it is not all about who gives you money in a campaign. It's about the things that you believe in your core. And if education isn't a core value around this state, particularly for what we've seen lately in the underfunding in K through 12, as well as the university being cut, then we should take notice about where our core values are and where the funding should come from. Thanks for the question. It's a great question, but it's not all about sometimes the small amounts of money. It's about funding a campaign from a grassroots level.
Governor, same question to you. Your two biggest donors are your parents, Joe and Marlene Ricketts, and Rick Sinkfield, a businessman from, Sinkfield from Missouri. Why should we not think that their donations would not unduly influence your policy choices?
Well, okay, my biggest donor is my mom and my dad. It's because they love me, right? So that's one of the reasons why they're doing that. And Rex is somebody who shares my philosophical belief that we need to make sure we're running government more like a business. That's the whole point of why I ran and why people, I think, elected me, is to bring my private sector skills to running state government more like a business. And that's what we've been doing. We've been implementing better process and better technology so we can actually do a better job of serving our customers while we're controlling costs at the same time. And that's been really important because, as I mentioned, our revenues were down. So we had to go in and tighten our belts. So even though some of my agencies took big cuts, we were still able to serve the people we're supposed to in areas like health and human services, children and family services, our behavioral health, all those places. We look for ways to do a better job serving our customers despite our budget constraints. So that's why I think that those people supported me, is because they wanted me to do a better job with how we were running the government, and they shared those same philosophical beliefs to do that. That's what we've been doing to help us grow Nebraska. We're getting the job done.
All right, next issue, and this question is for you, Governor Ricketts. College affordability continues to be a challenge for Nebraskans. What role should the state play in making sure that young Nebraskans can afford to go to college and come out with student debt loads that are manageable?
Yeah, certainly one of the things that's really important to being able to be successful in life is getting that great education. Though it doesn't necessarily always involve having to get that four-year degree. In fact, one of the things we've really highlighted in my administration is working with the private sector and schools, really letting a lot of our young people know there's great careers out there that may only require a two-year degree. And that may lead into getting that four-year degree. As you all know, the University of Nebraska is an important institution because that's where a lot of our young people get trained here and get their education in our state. But the University of Nebraska is run separately. It's run by a board of regents, it's got its own management, and it doesn't report to the governor. So when we go through these tough economic times, we've asked them to tighten their belts just like we've had to do, and they need to manage that to be able to serve the people, the students that they're serving. And that's what we need to do, is just all kind of pitch in to be a part of the issue so that we can continue to serve the people of Nebraska. That's what we focused on in my administration, on my agencies, is how we tighten our belts and still do a better job, just like I was describing before. The university has to do that, the state college system has to do that, community colleges. Everybody who gets money from the state has to be a part of that solution.
All right, Senator Krist, college affordability.
Absolutely. I think it starts, first of all, with the dual credit programs that we have seen put in place by our community colleges and our high schools. We can, as the governor has eloquently said, not everyone is going to a four-year college or institution. So we give them the opportunity to decide whether they want to go into a technical field, decide whether they want to be a welder or work on machinery. Then it's past the community college level. Will those credits transfer? And I worked extensively the last few years to make sure that the credits in a community college or our state colleges will transfer to the university at some point, because it's very important. But I'm going to address a little bit about one of the governor's comments here. He said that in his administration, everyone had to tighten their belts and take a hit. My words, not his. I'll remind the governor that while the rest of us were taking large amounts of hit, his personal office expenses, his budget, went up 5.5% in the last 2 years. So I would lead by example, first of all, to make sure that we're all taking the same amount of hit, if that indeed is where we're going to be. But what we've done is cut $48 million in 18 months and raised tuition by $5,000 a kid. That's not the way to get to where we need to get to.
All right, Governor Ricketts, you want to reply to that?
Yeah, and a couple things. One, I want to just tell one quick story. I met a guy from Miller Electric. He started off in the union, went to Metro Community College, got for 1 year, got his associate's degree, started working for Miller Electric, took advantage of the tuition reimbursement, got his bachelor's, now he's working on his MBA. He got a $153,000 education for about $24,000. That's the kind of opportunities we have out there. With regard to my office, again, we've been controlling expenses. We have eliminated positions in my office. We've asked all of our agencies to take a look at how they can tighten their belts, and we've done that. We've actually reduced the growth of government by over 90%. It was growing at 6.5% before I took over. This budget that I signed a few months ago, 0.5%.
Thank you, Governor. We're going to move on. Senator Krist, over the years, you've changed your position on several issues, including tax credits for private school tuition, death penalty, and even your party affiliation. Why should Nebraskans trust that in office you'll do what you say?
I think when you're exposed to any decision, and I've told folks who are coming into the legislature, the worst thing I think you can do is walk in the door and think you know everything about everything. You need to listen to the facts, you need to digest the facts, and you need to make an educated decision. I've had some life-changing events in my life that have caused me to rethink the way that I move forward with many issues. And the governor has too. For example, the governor thought that when we passed the increase in fuel tax to fund roads, he was adamantly against it. He lobbied against it. He brought us all in, and I was one, and said, "Don't vote for this. This is an increase in tax." Well, we passed it, and then he vetoed it, and then we overrode the veto. Something I learned from the process is we need to have consensus and build and move forward. And yet, today, I'm sure he believes in it because he's going all over the state saying it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So we all learn from things. We all learn because of our life experiences. And just because we change our mind for good reason, I think we shouldn't be judged adversely.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So the senator did vote to raise your gas taxes 23% and voted to override my veto because I do not want to raise your taxes. I think we're a high tax state already. We need to be reducing our taxes, not expanding our taxes. Now, once I was overridden in that, I was determined not to let that money go into things that you wouldn't want. So we created the Transportation Innovation Act to direct that and accelerating the work on our expressway system. And I might point out, not only did Senator Krist vote to raise your taxes, in other bills like this LB 468, he actually tried to rip off roads money. In fact, he wanted to get rid of Senator Fisher's Build Nebraska Act and put that into general fund spending. I will not allow that to happen.
Can I respond?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
The vote that I cast in order to turn around what Senator Fisher had done was simply to remind and to accentuate the point that the formula as it exists, because of the increased fuel mileage that cars are getting, we need to look at how that process is put together. Everything is not black and white, folks. Everything needs to be analyzed and moving forward. And I never voted for a 23% tax increase in gas tax. What I voted for was the gas tax that went into place. And by the way, at least 44 of my colleagues voted the same way in the legislature.
Governor Ricketts, you've been in office and you're the highest ranking officer in state government. You are one of the most influential donors. You spent $300,000 of your own money to reinstate the death penalty, and you have contributed to legislative races. Why should the average Nebraskan feel like their views are being represented in state government when one person has so much power over the process?
Well, I would say, first of all, one of the things that I do when I'm out talking to people, and I travel all across the state, is I tell them what we're doing. I did it on the campaign, I've done it as governor. So I communicate out to everybody, here's what we're going to do. Now, you may not always agree with me, but you're not going to be surprised by what I do because I tell you what I'm going to do and then I do it. So if you agree with me, then generally you appreciate the fact that I support conservative candidates, that I support causes, and I've done that since before I was governor as well. And I'm going to continue to do it. And you know, you talked about some of my contributions, but that pales in comparison to what the unions have put in. In the last election in 2016, the NSCA put in almost $500,000 through its organization and other shell organizations to elect candidates. So I'm not going to apologize for representing conservative viewpoints and conservative people when they want to see conservative people elected. That's kind of what we're all about in the system, is trying to make sure that the people that we appreciate, the people that share our values, get in office. So that's what I do. And again, nobody's going to be surprised by what I'm doing because I go out and tell everybody before they have the chance to vote for me.
All right, it's time for our second commercial break. When we come back, more issues, including medical marijuana. You're watching the debate for governor on KMTV 3 News Now and the Omaha World Herald. And welcome back to the debate for governor as we continue to delve into the issues.
The first question up when we're back is to Governor Ricketts. President Trump has increased tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, prompting new tariffs and threats of tariffs from American trading partners. The effects are being felt by Nebraska farmers and manufacturers. What would you do to help Nebraskans on this issue?
The vision for my administration is to grow Nebraska, and that means create more and better paying jobs, keep our kids and grandkids here, and make sure they can find their careers in our state. Agriculture is our biggest segment, and so if we're going to grow Nebraska, we have to grow agriculture. And so when it comes to the matter of tariffs, that creates a lot of issues for us. And so what I have done is stay in constant communication with the Trump administration on how those tariffs, whether it's on agriculture or on the steel tariffs, so that they know how it's impacting us here in Nebraska. So for example, in June I led a group of ag leaders to meet with our Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue to talk about tariffs. In July, I was talking with Commerce Secretary Ross about the steel tariffs and how it's impacting our manufacturers here, driving up the cost for their steel. And then this month, I was talking to Ambassador Lighthizer about the trade deals, and every time encourage him, guys, get these deals wrapped up so that we don't see further impacts to our folks here in Nebraska. And of course,